What is going on, everybody? Welcome back to College Football Talk with Peter Burnett. In today's episode, we're breaking down the Week 1 action. There's plenty to talk about. I'm going to be going through it with about 3 main topics and a couple of additional observations at the end. But before I do, if you're going to enjoy this video, please feel free to leave a like, consider subscribing to the channel, and turn on those post notifications so you're always up to date whenever I post. Starting things out, the main topic from this one, the question I'm asking is, are the Fighting Irish a lock for the college football playoff? Notre Dame took care of business at Kyle Field in College Station against Texas A&M, winning 23-13. Their defense was phenomenal. I think once again their passing defense and overall defense will be among the best in college football. Their passing defense specifically allowed just 19 completions and 30 passing attempts for an average of 3.3 yards per completion, which is a pretty good average. Against the rush, not as good, but against the pass, that's really good. And they had 2 interceptions in the win. Their offense made the necessary plays. They're not going to be a world-beating offense. Riley Leonard kind of settled in, a little bit of a slow start, finished the game 18 for 30 for 158 yards, no touchdowns, but also no interceptions. So he managed the game very well, made a few big throws late to lead Notre Dame to the win. They have a pretty strong backfield, though, Leonard included, Jeremiah Love and Jadarian Price. All 3 of those guys combined for, I think, around 200 yards. I'll pop up the official number on that. I didn't note that number down, but this Irish team looks well-rounded. Going into Kyle Field is not an easy place to get a win, and they're able to grab a win that really, I think, is probably going to be their toughest road test the rest of the way. The rest of their schedule, they're at Purdue, which I think is more of a trap game. I don't really see the Boilermakers matching up well, but as a Buckeye fan, I know that sometimes Ross-Ade Stadium can be very difficult to win at. Then they're home against Louisville, at Georgia Tech. I think that's also a little bit more of a trap game, but I think maybe a little bit of a tougher opponent after seeing what they did to Florida State. Then speaking of Florida State, the Seminoles are a home game. At that point, we'll see how they do against Boston College, but will the Seminoles even be ranked? That's a question that might need answering. And then at USC, I think this Notre Dame team has a really good chance to finish 12-0. If they do that, they're going to be the 5 seed in the playoff, really. I don't see any way that they're lower than that because it's literally impossible for there to be more than 4 undefeated teams, and I don't see that happening. That would only be if each of the conference champions won out. So I think Notre Dame is, yes, I would say they are a lock for the playoff. I don't see any way they lose any more than 2 of those games. I really see a low likelihood they even lose 1. So I think the Fighting Irish, yes, are a lock for the college football playoff. Before the season, I had them going to the playoff. A lock would have been strong, but this was their key game to win, and the Fighting Irish were able to win it, were able to win a big game. They might have 1 or 2 more the rest of the season that live up to this level, but I think being able to win this one is huge for the Irish and their playoff chances. Topic number 2 is anybody beating Georgia. Kind of a question that goes along with that, though, or is Clemson just really bad? Georgia dominated with a 34-3 win over the Tigers in Atlanta on Saturday. It was close, though, in the first half, and this is where I think maybe Clemson, at least defensively, isn't terrible. It was just 6-0 Georgia at halftime. A couple of field goals is all that the Bulldogs had, but their offense really figured things out in the second half. I mean, Carson Beck dissected the Tigers' defense. He finished 23 for 33, 278 yards, and 2 touchdowns. They look like a national championship team, the Bulldogs do, and I think Clemson is... I had them before the season as a playoff team. I think they still have everything in front of them. They knew that they were going to lose this game, I think, probably going in. I mean, obviously, the players and coaches guarded against that thinking, but got to be honest, I think they expected to lose. Did they expect to lose by this much, though? I don't think so. So they still have everything in front of them, though. This isn't even a conference loss, so they're still, I would say, one of the favorites to make the ACC championship game. But the other question here is, does this illustrate just how bad the ACC is? A couple of other games that kind of go against that thinking. Miami, how they were able to handle Florida. I'll talk about them in my next point. And then even Vanderbilt beating Virginia Tech, though, that is the one that does kind of line up with this thinking. I mean, and for Virginia Tech, I think that knocks them out of any sort of playoff discussion. Yes, they could go and win out. I don't think this is going to happen, but we saw, for example, a team like 2014 Ohio State where they lose a game that they really should win and go on to win the national championship. I don't think the Hokies are in that same boat. I'm just saying crazier things have happened before, although the Buckeyes did have huge expectations, so maybe that's not the right illustration there. But Hokies, I think, are probably out of it. I think maybe they're going to just have to figure some things out, but I don't think they're the team that a lot of people, myself included, were hyping them up to be this year. And I think on the flip side, Miami is. And that leads into my next point. The Hurricanes were dominant in a win over Florida. They really looked good throughout the game. Cam Ward really plugged into that Miami offense well. 385 passing yards, 3 touchdowns. He also picked up, I think, 33 yards on just 3 carries, but he had a couple of big runs in that game. The long run went for 24 yards, so he made some big plays. The question here is, are the Canes contenders for real? Going into the season, they were a team that I thought was kind of a little bit on the fringe. I thought they were a team that would kind of lose the big games, and they still have a lot of those big games in front of them. But getting this win in the Swamp shows me that they can win in a tough road environment. Even though the Gators aren't the Gators of yesteryear, they're still a really good team in the grand scheme of things. In the SEC, they're middle of the road, probably not that great, but they're still a solid team. They have a lot of talented players, and winning at the Swamp is not an easy thing to do. So I think, especially in the ACC, especially with the losses by Florida State and Clemson, Miami, I would say, has firmly placed themselves as the favorite in that conference. And then the question for the Gators, what will their final record be? We all know about their schedule, which I would say almost unquestionably is the toughest in college football. We know what their back 6 looks like, or their back 5 or 6. They have, I think their last 5 games are against teams that are in the top 15, although Florida State will probably drop out of that unless they can get back to that part when they face them in the regular season finale. I think this Gators team, though, they have a couple games even early in the season. They have UCF, who I think could be a tough opponent. They have Mississippi State, who could be tough. They go against A&M, who I think could be a tough opponent. And then that's all before that tough schedule to end the season. They also have Kentucky and Tennessee in there. I think there's a serious question of, can this Gators team get to 3 or 4 wins? With this schedule and the way they looked in week 1, I don't think that's a ridiculous question to ask. And I think there's a serious chance that this Gators team potentially finishes the year with just 3 or 4 wins. And if that's the case, even with a tough schedule, if that's all they get, I think that's probably the end of the line for Billy Napier. So definitely some questions to be answered in Florida. I think we saw a little bit from DJ Lagway. I think played reasonably well considering the situation he was in, but overall, really poor performance for the Gators. Some other observations from Saturday. Iowa has an offense. It took them some time. I think I don't know if they were held scoreless. Maybe they had like 6 points or something like that at halftime. Really low scoring against Illinois State. And then they just completely figured things out in the second half, and they were able to put up 40. It's an FCS opponent, albeit not a great performance, but something that was brought up by the Nonpareil sports writer that I work with, Austin Heinen, who also has his own YouTube channel, Fantastic Freaks. Check that out. He said, that a Brian Ferentz coached offense, I think, put up only like 3 points against South Dakota State. So putting up that against an FCS opponent is certainly an improvement and shows that maybe Iowa does finally have an offense. Another thing, Oregon really struggled against Idaho. I know we all love Idaho because of the Kibbe Dome, the stadium that they play in, but I don't think anybody expected the Vandals to keep that one close, and I think the final score was just a 10 or 7 point game, a win for the Ducks. So they're figuring things out. They're working in a new quarterback, Dylan Gabriel. There's a lot of expectations placed on him this year. Definitely a lot to live up to, and that seemed to show in week 1. I mean, there's always the chance I'd have to look at film of the game. Maybe Idaho just drew up a really good game plan against the Ducks, but certainly maybe a little bit of concern for the Ducks. I would only really be concerned if that continues into this next week. Kind of same idea with Ohio State's early struggles against Akron, even Michigan against Fresno State, those sort of things. Penn State handled business at West Virginia. There's not too much to take away from that. I think Drew Waller looked even better than he did last year. Their defense obviously is really good, among the best in college football. And picking up a good road win against the Power 4 opponent is going to be a big resume booster for the Nittany Lions come playoff time in terms of seeding. And I think that's probably going to be more important for deciding whether they host or travel on the road for a first-round playoff game. But it could also determine if they're able to run the table in the Big Ten, which will be tough. They'll have to beat Ohio State along that way. Could be something that benefits them in the long run. Finally, a receiver that I cannot wait to watch this year. I think, he showed potential for this in the first game of this season, like he did last year. Totoiroa McMillan, the wide receiver at Arizona, had 304 receiving yards, which I think is second all-time or tied for second all-time in the Big 12 in a single game, and 4 touchdowns. Him and Noah Fafita at quarterback. Arizona, I think, is still going to be very good this year. Their defense definitely needs to figure some things out. That was a high-scoring game that they played against New Mexico, but I think the Wildcats are a serious contender for the Big 12, and because of that, I think there's a chance they could potentially get into the college football playoff if their defense can come together and their offense continues to produce at that level. But that is all for this episode of College Football Talk. I'll either throw on a segment at the end of this video, which will go right here, or have a video in itself talking about the USC-LSU game. There's a lot of stakes in that one.
In their win over LSU, USC really put on a clinical performance. Miller Moss threw for 385 yards and 3 touchdowns. Kyron Hudson certainly emerged as a potential wide receiver 1 option for the Trojans. I think something like 5 receptions for 80 catches. He had a couple of incredible one-handed highlight reel catches during the win. I think the Trojans have found their next quarterback and wide receiver. I think they could be a dangerous duo. But perhaps the even bigger story is how the USC defense stepped up in this game. Deontay Lynn's team, he's the defensive coordinator, his unit has really, it appears, made strides. LSU is a good offense. Garrett Nussmeier is a good quarterback. Kyron Lacey is a good wide receiver. He had a couple big plays. But USC overall was able to kind of limit what the Tigers were able to do with the ball. And USC comes away with a big 27-20 victory.
And of course, later this week, I'll have a video previewing the Week 2 action and offering my picks. On those, did pretty well this week. I think I went 7-1 through the first 8 games that I predicted, 6-2 against the spread. So pretty good Week 1 action. The only game I got wrong straight up was picking the Stanford upset over TCU. The Horned Frogs got the job done in Palo Alto against the spread. I think I still got that one right against the spread. I missed a couple. Oklahoma State destroyed South Dakota State. Played a little bit better than I expected in that one. That I got wrong against the spread. But if you watched this point in the video, thank you so much for checking out College Football Talk. I'm your host, Peter Burnett, signing out. Peace.